On today's show, the San Diego Padres got a godsend trade right before the year for our legendary Sage King, Dylan Cease, going over his 2024 season, the good, the bad, the occasional ugly, going over those playoff performances, and whether or not, because of those performances, is this a player that the Padres should consider trading? All that and more. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You may be familiar with my other baseball-related work over at Just Baseball, where I not only have been writing, I've been getting back into the swing of things. Recently wrote a piece about Anthony Santander being a trap, and also how I'm joining the Eloy Jimenez fan club. So go check that out. And I also work on their newsletter, and I also work on a podcast over there that is currently in hibernation, but it will be back soon. So stay tuned to hear more about that. Of course, again, follow me on those accounts and also send me questions for each week's mailbag. We should have done that yesterday. Full disclosure, recording today's episode before the week even starts. I'm getting some episodes in the bank. So if anything changes dramatically, so just keep that in mind. I'm recording this on a Saturday. So just keep that in mind. I still think everything should be relevant because we're going to be talking about Dylan Cease, but nonetheless, keep that in mind. And again, very much so appreciate your guys' questions and comments. Hopefully, I think the Dodgers fans have left. I'm pretty sure that we're not going to have a swarm of those people anymore, so I will see all your questions. Today's episode, guys, is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Today's episode, guys, we are breaking down the legendary, the sensational, the quintessential piece, dare I say, of what made the Padres rotation so good this year. That is one Sir Dylan Cease. And I think that before we get into just him as a player, I think that you got to talk about just the circumstances for Dylan Cease this year. And that was just, this was a player that had been really highly sought after by many teams over the years, especially because the White Sox are entering such frankly, just a devastating rebuild, right? Like, this is a team, and again, not to get too off track, but it really goes to show you how quickly things can change in baseball, right? Because the White Sox were kind of, at least by my approximation, considered a little bit of the American League version of the Padres, in the sense that they had all these great personalities. They had these superstar, very famous players. You have Tim Anderson, you have Luis Robert, you have guys like that. You have Eloy Jimenez, who I know is a bit of a meme now, but at the time. Then you have Dylan Cease, you have Carlos Rodon, you had Lance Lynn at one point. Like, they had a really good rotation. They had good players. And they made one playoff run at least. And they were considered to have like one of the best farm systems in baseball. Padres did too, and Padres managed to keep it together because everybody, sorry to get on the soapbox, they also spent some money. So even though they lost a lot of their prospects and whatnot, and not everybody turned out amazing, they did spend some money elsewhere and were able to get some players. And Dylan Cease ends up becoming, one of the few remaining assets that the team has. So they trade him, and the Padres gave up a decent sized package. And it was right before the season, by the way, just as a friendly reminder. And for those who don't remember, the trade was a really interesting one because not only did it happen basically right before the team started traveling to Seoul for the series against the Dodgers to start off the series in Korea, it was, in exchange for Dylan Cease, they gave up Drew Thorpe, Samuel Zavala, Jairo Iriarte, and Steven Wilson. Now, I will say that basically all of those players, when you look at this package as a whole, it doesn't really age all that poorly, right? Like, Drew Thorpe, I think, is a player that showed a couple signs, like flashes, but he didn't really produce and wasn't all that effective for the White Sox this year, right? 5.48 ERA. And especially for a team that, is going for it now, this was not the type of prospect that was going to be ready just yet. Zavala, I think that this is a player that could absolutely still do something. I don't want to project anything about prospects necessarily, but as of right now, he's still very, very raw. Great peripherals, great talent, but very, very raw. Iriarte, that was another player that people were a little bit nervous about, I think, is because he was the type of player that might be able to produce immediately. And in fairness, He did in a little bit of a frame time, right? In 6 innings this year, he had a 1.5 ERA. Expected stats really bad, though. 4.14 expected ERA, 5.17 FIP. But a little bit of a reliever. I think he's interesting. Solid piece that maybe could have helped the Padres. But I think that they decided, you know what? Our bullpen is okay, so we're not going to freak out too much about this, right? And then you had Steven Wilson. And Steven Wilson was actually, I remember there was an article, I believe, that was done. I'm going to say, I believe it was it Jeff Sanders of the San Diego Tribune? I'm forgetting who it was exactly that did an article about him that basically kind of showed that he was really perfecting his slider, that he might be a really big contributor for this Padres team. And it turns out doesn't really do that this year, right? 5.71 ERA for the White Sox in 34 innings. I actually thought he was going to be a nice piece, and he was actually really, really, really bad. So basically, as of right now, just a total win of a trade. And you have to remember that coming into this season, we didn't know what was necessarily going to happen with Yu Darvish. We didn't know if Joe Musgrove was going to be, sensational 100% because he kept getting hurt, right? And that's what's so fascinating is that without the Dylan Cease trade, this Padres team, I don't know how they stay afloat in the first half because Michael King did not become what he became. And we're going to be doing a player review on him soon, possibly later in this week. He didn't become what he ended up becoming, which was a top 5, like Cy Young type of pitcher, vote getter, until much later. So you basically kind of just had Dylan Cease for the start of the Padres season, right? That's kind of the situation you had here. And AJ Preller deserves a lot of credit because heading into last offseason, think about it. The only thing you knew about the Padres was that they weren't going to really be spending and that they really needed some extra starting pitching help with the fact that you're like, oh God, we have Yu Darvish and then we have Joe Musgrove, and then oh God, we better hope Robbie Snelling and Dylan Lesko are ready. That's kind of the situation that they were in heading into the year, and then they do that trade for Juan Soto, which ends up being amazing, right? They get Michael King in exchange, who we're going to talk about again later on in the week, and then you also get one of the prospects, Drew Thorpe, that ends up being used to acquire Dylan Cease. So really, I just want to talk about that before we talk about him, is that this was such an amazing trade. And AJ Preller and company deserve a lot of credit for turning a bad situation, which was a team that maybe stuck its head a little bit too deep in the water, right? Like they just went a little bit too far and they didn't prepare for the future and just weren't prepared to build out the rest of the team just in case they had the disaster that was 2023. So as a result, you found yourselves like, we can't really afford to keep Juan Soto for this year because the team and ownership wants to get under the luxury tax threshold, which we spent a lot of time in this podcast talking about. So they have to move Juan Soto, but they got a lot of stuff in exchange. Not to mention they got Kyle Higashioka, and they still got at least some guys who can throw in Johnny Brito and Randy Vasquez. Even if they weren't all that amazing, they certainly weren't negatives the way that a Drew Thorpe was, right? So I just think that overall, the Preller deserves so much credit for trading at max value Juan Soto, the best you could do, salvaging a really bad situation, getting a starting pitcher who has been excellent and was very, very good this season. Even if some Padres fans are a little bit ungrateful for Dylan Cease. That's something that I've noticed, and I think something that I've noticed amongst just fans sometimes in general, is pitchers like Dylan Cease, you get disappointed when they don't have the 6 innings, 12 strikeout, 4 hit performance. Sometimes you get a little bit disappointed. You're like, wait, why is this guy great? There's these games where he just looks terrible, right? And that's true, but I think that I would remind those people that there's only like maybe 5 to 8 guys in the league that at minimum, they'll just be okay every single start. That like Corbin Burns, Garrett Cole, players like that. You're just not going to find those. And Dylan Cease is one of those players that, year to year has been actually very consistent. But understandably, some people were a little bit nervous because heading into last season, he was rocking a 4.58 ERA with the White Sox. It was not nearly as good as his 2.2 that he showed in 2022 when he also finished really top in Cy Young voting. So what exactly happened? We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about why Dylan Cease had such a great season. And then also talk about a little bit of the bad. Don't worry, we'll get into some of the bad in just one second, guys. But first, I need to talk to you about one of our sponsors, and that is the undeniable, the perfect, dare I say, sponsor, and that is our friends over at Gametime. Here's the thing, folks. Here's the thing I got to talk to you about, man. When it comes to getting your best tickets, when it comes to getting all the things you could possibly need, everything, guys, everything. When it comes to everything you need from your ticket buying needs, Gametime has you covered, because what I really like about them is the prices actually go down the closer you get to the game time. That's why they're calling it that, right? So maybe you find out that you're actually free a little bit more after work. The happy hour got canceled. You want to attend the baseball game instead. You want to go see the Padres. Their opening month this next year. This is an app that will help you for that. And it also helps you across all other sports, from Major League Baseball to the NBA to the WNBA to the NHL to whatever you need, on top of concerts, comedy clubs, theater, whatever you want. They have you covered. They've got all sorts of flash deals and zone deals where you pick the zone of the stadium and then Gametime picks the seat for you at a discounted price. They will credit you the 110% of the difference. I guess you could argue those two words maybe share a similarity in some context, but still, even if you want to, they have all these event cancellation protections. It's fantastic, guys. You can even see where your seats are. They show you what it'll look like when you buy your seat. They'll show you exactly what it's going to look like when you sit there. What else could you possibly want? So, take the guesswork out of buying tickets, guys. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed with Gametime. And just like that, everybody, we are back, thriving, and most certainly vibing in the Locked On Padres podcast, talking about Dylan Cease's season. Gave you a little bit of pretext. Now let's talk about him this season, okay? There was a lot of things that went well for Dylan Cease. Again, first of all, just when it comes to reviewing the year, again, I don't know where this Padres team is without him. I want to emphasize that one more time, because without him, I think that the beginning of the season is a mess. Because you had Yu Darvish, who ends up being injured and just not, you just don't know what you're getting from him. Joe Musgrove, who's a mess at the beginning of the year. Michael King, who's a mess at the beginning of the year. And yes, Matt Waldron, also a player. Remember Matt Waldron? Also a mess at the beginning of the year. He ends up becoming a little bit more valuable as you get into the preceding months, don't get me wrong. But Dylan Cease basically held down the Padres starting pitching for the first 2 months of the season when we didn't know exactly what the rotation even was. And with Dylan Cease this year, the other thing about him, I think the number one thing that I would like to point to first is that Dylan Cease's fastball velocity returned in full this season, right? He was in 78th percentile fastball velocity last season, which wasn't bad, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't nearly as good as what we had seen before. And for a pitcher that's getting a little bit older, you don't like seeing a dip in velocity, right? Every year before that, he was in 90th percentile, and specifically his fastball velocity by year. His four-seamer, 95.6 miles per hour in 2023. Before that, it was 96.8. Before that, it was 96.6. Before that, it was 97.7. And then 96.5 before that. So for it to drop to 95.6, while not the end of the world, because again, Dylan Cease is not, 38 years old or anything like that, it still makes you a little bit nervous, right? And there was a direct correlation, seemingly, between his down 2023 season and his fastball velocity. Because last year, opponents against his fastball didn't, kill it, but they certainly hit it pretty well. They hit 273 off of the pitch in 2023. Even though the expected batting average is 251, you were still a little bit nervous. They slugged 436 off of it, and they also hit his knuckle curve really, really well. So that wasn't helping, right? But this next season, again, absolutely bounces back. 96.9 fastball velocity, back in the 90th percentile, where he deserves, where he belongs, and opponents hit 235 off of it. So there was literally a direct correlation between his down season and the fact that his fastball velocity was down. And that did not happen here, right? And that was awesome. I think that Cease kind of shows you, maybe there's a theory about thinking, you know what? Hey guys, maybe sometimes when you're pitching for a really miserable team, maybe you're just trying to keep yourself a little bit healthy. Maybe you're just not quite into it. These are human beings, and I think that we forget sometimes that not everything is written in stone. But it really is worth bringing up because people were nervous. Another thing about Dylan Cease was his slider. Now that's the big thing that happened this year. Dylan Cease's slider has been great for a long time. Don't get me wrong. This isn't breaking news or anything like that. But this year, it was amongst one of the best. On top of the fact that opponents only hit 159 against the pitch this year, which is bonkers. Let me tell you guys, that is absolutely insane. And it wasn't unlucky. Or this wasn't a luck thing. Expected batting average of 168. They could not slug. It carried with it a whiff rate of 44.7%, which was a little bit better than his past years. It's always been probably his best pitch, but this is the best it had been since his 2021 season when he nearly won the Cy Young, which he had a 50% whiff rate, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken. So absolutely sensational stuff from him. And it graded out, if you like going by run value, which kind of just shows you like how valuable a pitch is in certain situations, how valuable it is at just progressing the game forward in favor of your team. He had a plus 19 run value for the pitch, which was tied for second among all sliders, among all starting pitchers in baseball this year. The only person who had a pitch that graded better was Mr. Chris Sale, right? In terms of pitchers who actually were starting pitchers, it was basically just Sale that had a better slider than Dylan Cease this year. Especially because Sale used it much more as a put away pitch, and especially because he got a little bit more of a ground ball rate on it. All that sort of stuff, but we're just nitpicking. Bottom line is Cease was back to his usual stuff, and it was great. Another thing about Dylan Cease, and this is where I think the fun and where the Ruben Niebla magic comes in. On top of the fastball velocity, right, which was something that wasn't guaranteed to necessarily come back because, again, this is starting pitchers. Everybody gets nervous about that. The slider always has been great, but even still, we're still wondering how good it's going to be the next year. No, the next best thing about Dylan Cease's year, you know what it was? The lowest walk rate of his entire career, folks. His entire career. Dylan Cease. That's right. One of the things about Dylan Cease for his whole career has been, dang, does he have the strikeout rate stuff? But, oh man, does he tend to walk a lot of batters. And it's not that his walk rate was low. Don't get me wrong. Let me be very clear here. But the fact that he was back to balancing it out a lot better, I think, is a nice kind of plus in favor of our sage master Ruben Niebla and what he's able to do. 29.4% strikeout rate this year was up. It wasn't the 30% mark or even the 31% mark that it was previously, but 8.5% walk rate. That's the lowest it had been since 2021, in which he carried a 9.6% walk rate. That is a big reason for why Dylan Cease was so great this year. And that's why we love him. We appreciate so much that he was not being quite as... He could be frustrating in previous years where it felt like, man, it's strikeout or walk for this guy, and he can just be a little bit wild. He can let up a little bit too many free passes, and you kind of know sometimes early on when it's going to be a bad Dylan Cease start, and that's not fun, you know what I mean? But overall, I just think that you saw this year, the guy was just fantastic at basically every aspect of his game. He also had the lowest home run rate of his entire career, too, which is great. And that might come as a bit of a surprise because Dylan Cease did have some really bad moments this year. But I think all in all, when it comes to judging a starting pitcher like Cease, the bottom line is he helped you get through the regular season. And I know that we're going to talk about the playoffs in just a second, but bottom line is he was just really good at providing value in a way that very few other starting pitchers do. I understand that there are other starting pitchers that are awesome, but then what happens? They get hurt or they don't pitch as much. They're inconsistent, right? Dylan Cease, year after year, has been this type of pitcher who is going to produce for you. He has the 7th most innings pitched in total among all pitchers since 2021, right? So as much as people want to complain a little bit about him, only Aaron Nola, Logan Webb, Zach Wheeler, Corbin Burns, and Jose Barrios, and Kevin Gausman have pitched more innings than him since 2021. All of those guys are good, by the way. Barrios probably being the lowest. Gausman lately hasn't been good. I think he was bad this past year for some strange reason, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see. Yeah, he wasn't great. He was still okay, but he wasn't great. But Kevin Gausman has been amongst one of the best pitchers in all of baseball for a long time now, right? Corbin Burns is about to get paid $200 million this offseason. Zach Wheeler is one of the most reliable starting pitchers in the game, especially in clutch situations. Logan Webb, also very good, even if he doesn't have the strikeout rate stuff that Dylan Cease does, right? Aaron Nola is kind of the perfect comp for Dylan Cease. It really, really is. These are two players that can be a little bit frustrating with their kind of every other year thing, but overall, they're just consistent, and you need pitchers like this to get you through the season. Now, don't get me wrong, not everything for Dylan Cease was perfect this year. I think one of the biggest things is that it was, while he is consistent in terms of being available, which is really, really key, and don't let anyone convince you that availability and innings pitched isn't important for judging starting pitchers. It absolutely is. He was a little bit inconsistent this year, month to month. Specifically in terms of just looking at his ERA, he had some months that weren't great. In June, he had a home run palooza. He gave up 5, right? That wasn't great. If people might remember, I actually remember being with my friend when this game happened. The Mets game when they hit like 6 home runs off of him. That wasn't great. But I'd say a little bit of a negative this year was the fact that he was a little bit tale of two cities sometimes, right? He was great overall. First half, 3.99 ERA. That's not dreadful. At least, again, he was pitching for you and was doing really well. Second half, a 2.66. But in general, in March and April, 2.78 ERA. In May, 4.8 ERA. Then in June, 4.94 ERA. Then in July, glory strucketh thee with a 2.35 ERA. Then in August, 4.43 ERA. And then September, October, 2.97. So he did have a little bit of an inconsistency streak to him this year. That wasn't great. And I think that led to some concerns over the playoffs where people are like, look, this is the type of guy who can go out and go 6 innings, like I said earlier. 1 run and 2 hits, 13 Ks. He's absolutely capable of that. And by the way, he did produce. He had a couple starts like that throughout the year when they really, really needed him. But you are a little bit worried about him for the playoffs, which we're going to talk about in just a second, guys. And I also want to talk really briefly about Dylan Cease and whether or not this is the player that the Padres want to keep, whether they want to trade him going forward, because I think that's a little bit of an interesting, potentially even spicy little idea that the Padres may have going forward. So we're going to talk about that in just 1 second, folks. But first, I must talk to you about another one of our sponsors, ladies and gentlemen. That is our friends over at FanDuel. NFL fans, you want to get started on your betting season? Well, you can, and get a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's right. If you win or lose, don't worry about it. You just got to place your $5 and you get 200 buckaroos for free. How much of a deal is that, folks? So whether you're feeling, this next weekend, okay, so I'm recording, so it should be, maybe it's the first week of your fantasy playoffs and you're feeling spicy. Who you think is going to win that weird NFC division with the Cardinals and the Seahawks? Who's going to win the NFC South, right? Or is it NFC South with the Vikings and the Packers and the Lions and all that stuff? Whatever you want, you can go check it out on FanDuel, guys. That's right, America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel. Go check it out. And just like that, everybody, we are thriving and vibing back into this segment, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. Let's talk about Dylan Cease, a little bit more of the flaws. So I just talked about the fact that he was inconsistent throughout the season, right? Like he was a little bit of a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde when it came to month-to-month production. He was still good. I think that 1 month where he had a 4.04 ERA is totally fine. It's the mid-4s and the high-4 month that I don't think was very great. Like you just didn't know all the time what you were going to get out of him. But overall, again, still very good. But there was a question, and I do think overall that the Padres fan base, I think people might have soured on him. Maybe even you listeners, at least just from what I see. That people did sour on him because the end of his season didn't go well. He gets absolutely torched by the Dodgers in the first game of that playoff series. Granted, it was Shohei Ohtani, right? But he gets torched in that first playoff game, which leaves them behind the hole. They end up actually doing well in that game, and it's an absolutely insane game too. If you guys remember that game 1, absolutely wild. Just quick aside, breaking the fourth wall for a second, guys. I really hope they get Roki Sasaki because I really want this rivalry to be close, and because those games are amazing. But anyway, moving back on to Dylan Cease. So he wasn't great in that respect. And I think that it revealed a little bit of a flaw in him as a pitcher, which is he may need a third pitch. Now, here's the thing. I don't think that this is an impossible thing, but this year, Dylan Cease, his usage of his four-seamer and slider were basically the only pitches that he used. He only used his knuckle curve 7.9% of the time, right? He basically never used it. He used it occasionally. Don't get me wrong, he flashed it every now and then. It's not a bad pitch, not a terrible pitch, but it wasn't that effective. And actually, when you look at basically years past, his knuckle curve has always been one of his weaker pitches, despite the fact that it's his third most used pitch. In 2023, it was a big problem for him. Batters hit 298 off of it, and they slugged 538. Now, it is a knuckle type pitch, so it is sometimes comes with the territory, a little bit of a what's that called? Hazard, occupational hazard when you use that pitch. But in past years, it's been effective. They hit 253 against it one year, and it had an expected average of 215. In previous year before that, they hit 200. So instead, Niebla, following last year, it looks like they focused on the fastball, getting that velocity back up, using the slider to be the ultimate put-away pitch, and then just kind of ditched the knuckle curve a little bit. 15% usage of the knuckle curve in 2023, 13.9 the year before, 15.2% the year before, and that's kind of the situation here. He does have other pitches. He throws a changeup every now and then, but even that, it just seems like they haven't figured out what is his third pitch. But I still think he has the talent and ability to have one. But I will say, even though we're talking about the negatives, it's worth bringing up, guys, it's the Dodgers. They kill fastballs, especially fastballs high in the zone. You know what I mean? Like, there's just kind of, it's a good team. So I'm not going to be mad that Dylan Cease, and I know that he was a disaster in the next game, but it was on short rest, right, in the playoffs. I'm not going to just crush this guy because the Dodgers beat him. Like, yeah, I understand. Yu Darvish was great against them. Michael King was a little bit better against them until, actually, no, was he? No, Michael King wasn't. That's the other thing. Michael King wasn't even that great against them. He actually, remember when the Padres took that like crazy lead in Game 3? And they end up winning the game, but they basically let, Teoscar Hernandez hit the grand slam. Michael King got killed that game too. It's a good lineup over there with Shohei, with Teoscar Hernandez, with Mookie Betts, with Freddie Freeman. Don't get me wrong, Mookie Betts, I really wish you spent one more playoff stretch being bad, because he had been bad in the playoffs for a while now. I wish just one more would have been nice, but he didn't. He woke up because he's a great player. That was going to happen eventually, right? Like, I had no doubt in my mind. I was just hoping that it wouldn't for this one more series, but he did. So if we're going to crush Dylan Cease for the playoff performance, I just don't think that that's fair, because again, Michael King wasn't very good, right? Like, he struggled against his team too. So I just find it a little bit unfair, right? And also, not to mention, remember, Dylan Cease would not have been put in that position if not for the Joe Musgrove injury, right? Joe Musgrove getting injured was a disaster for this Padres team. I'm not using it as like some sort of giant excuse, especially against the Dodgers, who were down so many starting pitchers. I'm just saying that's one of the reasons why we have a sour taste in our mouths, because Dylan Cease had to be used. And should they have used him? Maybe not, because they probably should have used their bullpen a little bit. Maybe we disagree with Mike Schilt about that. And we're going to talk about, we're going to be doing a players, I guess, review of the Padres bullpen this week as well. So look forward to that, by the way. So to me, yes, I do think development of a third pitch could be very, very important. I really do. I think that with Dylan Cease, if you want this guy to be someone that you can trust in the postseason, that's great. But all in all, there's kind of not too much that I have to hate on when it comes to Dylan Cease, because this is still a player, and I don't love using wins above replacement for starting pitchers, but 4.8 mark, he's had at least a 3.6 mark in all 4 of the last seasons. That's right. You might be saying, well, I thought he wasn't very good last year. He still threw a lot of innings, still got a lot of strikeouts, and he had one of the worst defenses in baseball behind him. So it inflated him. And again, he was just on a bad team, so maybe the morale wasn't there. But he's always a really steady pitcher. And it's just hard to find guys like this. Like I said, 7th most innings pitched among all starting pitchers since 2021. Like, this guy is just, he's money, man. Like, he's been pitching a lot, and he's been a really good player. And it's not like it's over for him. He's 28 years old. He's still a little bit young. And look, again, you can nitpick a couple more things about Dylan Cease. His first pitch strike percentage was down this year, right? He wasn't always getting ahead of counts. And I think that resulted in some of the inconsistency. But again, there's too many other things that were great about him. I just don't think that I just don't think Dylan Cease is complicated. You know? This is not a pitcher that I find to be particularly complicated. I just think that his repertoire is really strong, and he's talented and focused enough that he could absolutely come out next year, use a knuckle curve, or even a changeup. He's used those pitches before, right? And even if that doesn't happen, right? Even if that doesn't happen, I don't think that that is a flaw in a player that he can't go out and we know for sure he'll be amazing in the postseason. Guess what? Yu Darvish, great pitcher, but he's getting older, and Dylan Cease is more valuable because he's getting you through the season and getting you into the postseason. I think the bigger thing that happened here, and the reason why people had a sour taste, is because of the playoffs, and I think that that's unfair because, number one, if Joe Musgrove doesn't get hurt, I have a lot of faith that the Padres get a really good start out of him. And then number two is that Michael King was also not great in that postseason series, right? It was basically Yu Darvish, and that was it. So I just find that to be a really unfair thing to use against Dylan Cease. But even still, it results in some people wondering, like, is this a guy that you want to keep going forward? Do you want to even trade him? I think that Cease, look, he carries with himself like an $8 million average annual value. I imagine that he's going to get a little bit of a boost in arbitration this upcoming season and whatnot. But I think that trading Dylan Cease is only on the table if the Padres are a mess this year, which, in fairness, it's not impossible that happens. Remember, one of the things about the Padres is that they've been very inconsistent over the years. 2023, one of the least clutch teams of the century. 2022, a good team, but it was basically because Manny and all the players like kind of Manny and Ha-Seong Kim just got hits at the right time, and then they made the trades for Soto. 2021, one of the biggest collapses of the 21st century, and probably even before that. 2020, very good, but it was a small sample size, and we for some reason thought that Will Myers and especially Eric Hosmer were going to keep up what they were doing. So it's been an inconsistent team. So it's not impossible that happens. So I could see a world in which the Padres are like, all right, maybe we should move on from this guy. If that happens, you get a decent package for him. This is a guy who you could actually get some stuff for. The same thing for Michael King. But I think that the question will be whether or not they extend Dylan Cease. Would I extend him? I think I will. I think I would. I would probably want to see what he does this season. I'd want to see, but I'm not using playoffs, right? I'm using overall, what do you do for our season? And what happens is this guy's like a 4-win pitcher. This is a guy who's going to boost your rotation, who's going to be really, really good, and yes, have some frustrating starts, but he'll make up for it. If we're always going to be talking about Blake Snell, who's a Cy Young caliber pitcher, that guy always starts off dreadful to begin the season. He might start off dreadful for the Dodgers this season, but he makes up for it because of all the other starts. And that's kind of how you view Dylan Cease. The difference is that it doesn't happen consecutively the way it happens for Snell. When Snell's on, guy just rocks like a 1.8 ERA for the rest of the year. It's kind of amazing what he does. And then before that, he stinks, right? He'll have like a 5, high 4s ERA. I'm not even kidding. Just go look at the numbers. I think extending Dylan Cease, I think a lot depends on what is about to happen this offseason. I really do believe that Roki Sasaki is like such a must for the Padres. It's so much more of a must than he is for the Dodgers. Despite what maybe some people will say, a team that literally just won the World Series and added a Cy Young pitcher, the Roki Sasaki thing is needed for the Padres to stay really competitive. Because acquiring him for basically not all that much, to basically view it as you would basically be getting the number one prospect in baseball, and that's how you should view it, because he's not going to cost much. That's basically what would happen if the Padres get Roki Sasaki, and you have that under control for a while. And if that happens, then I think that the decision over Dylan Cease and Michael King becomes a lot more simple, and you're like, all right, maybe we just extend one of them, right? And maybe then you trade the other, and then you say, all right, maybe we can, flesh out the rest of the roster. Maybe they might need a catcher. By the time you guys are watching this, Gary Sanchez just signed, right? There's no more Gary, no more Danny Jansen, no more Kyle Higashioka on the thing. So maybe they need another catcher. I don't know. But this is a team that you just don't want to give away some of these pitchers. I think they're probably going to have to extend one of these guys, maybe even two, depending on how the offseason goes. I know Shane Bieber was another pitcher that just signed. Talked about him on the mailbag. Or at least I should have talked about him on the mailbag. Future me from the past thinks. I think with these two guys, I'm wondering what you guys think. Should the Padres extend Dylan Cease? I think they may have no choice, because that Joe Musgrove injury, him being out for all of 2025, and hey, not knowing what you're going to necessarily get out of him in 2026, and the fact that you gave up your pitching prospects for those big bullpen arms that we're going to review later on this week, doing that resulted in making it like we really need to hope that these guys stay locked down. I wish they had another year of control, at least just one of them. I wish Cease or King had another year of control, but this is where you are, and this is why you got to be careful with how much you spend, because you reach a situation where, oh no, we don't have a lot of roster flexibility right now. And not to mention, I don't really know what trading Dylan Cease gets you. The biggest issue with this Padres team right now is starting pitching. And yeah, you might want another DH, right? Because the Solano thing, we don't know exactly what's going to happen there. But overall, the big thing about this team is they need starting pitching. You cannot, you're just a little bit worried. Now, and I don't even think they need a dynamite starting pitcher, which is why Roki would be perfect as like this prospect guy that you hope is going to be good and get better as seasons go on. Remember, Shohei Ohtani was not great immediately upon coming over to the States. He won Rookie of the Year, but it was mostly because it was a novelty thing, and it was just really cool that someone was hitting and pitching at least adequately. Then he became what he became. But just for now, having that control, making it that you could go out and get Roki Sasaki and then get Max Scherzer, right, as like a fifth starter. That's fun, right? Like I would absolutely Wade Miley. Like I'm pretty sure he's probably a free agent. Like the Padres are in a position where it's just they need to look a little bit beyond this year. And I think that Dylan Cease is absolutely the type of pitcher. There's a reason the Phillies paid Aaron Nola, who we just comped him to, because Aaron Nola's consistent. Yes, he's frustrating. He's a very year-to-year pitcher, but bottom line, he's going to throw almost 200 innings. He's going to get some strikeouts. He'll have some bad starts in between. But players like Cease are simply too rare. You can find guys all over the league that have a good season or two and either get hurt or they regress and they're not as good as you thought they were. you can't find guys that are as consistent year to year and just being effective at getting you through the season as Dylan Cease, with the occasional flourish, more than occasional flourish of being an ace quality pitcher. So I'm giving Dylan Cease a season an A. I think that he's getting a little bit too much flack for the playoffs, and I think that there's room to improve. It's not over for him, and I think he's got the mentality for it, and I think the Padres brass has shown you, the pitching lab that they've got, that they're cooking up, that they're ready to make him even better. So really proud of Dylan Cease. This trade really did so much for the Padres, and the team deserves a lot of credit because it was not a guarantee that they were going to be able to have a starting rotation that stayed throughout the rest of the season. So with all that being said, everybody, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Going to be reacting to all the news of the winter meetings kicking off this week. Probably going to get the Soto deal by the time you guys have listened to this. It's probably already happened. I don't know when this episode is exactly coming out. Notice, keen listeners will have noticed that I didn't say a date because I'm recording these beforehand because I got a lot of stuff going on this week. So some of these episodes are in the bank, but you should be getting bullpen player reviews. That should be coming out this week. Probably going to do one on Michael King. Going to be reacting to some stuff and have an interview that you might have already seen or maybe is coming. I don't know. Again, I don't know when this episode's coming out. With my guy Ryan Bergert, Padres prospect. Going to be talking with him. Fun little interview for you guys. So look forward to that. And until next time, stay safe and of course stay faithful. My Friday Faithful homies, take care.